How would you feel if the place you considered your second family, where you poured your heart and soul for over a decade, coldly pushed you out the door with nothing but a piece of paper? My employee ID was confiscated, right under the smug gaze of my own cousin, the one I had personally mentored into the business. The scent of her expensive perfume, the one I remembered advising her on when she got her first raise, now felt like a taunt. I am Eleanor Vance. And for 12 years the Alabaster Arch wasn't just a job. It was where I placed my trust. I used to believe that dedication and loyalty would always be rewarded. But perhaps in this polished world, those values are merely tools for others to exploit. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside by those you wholeheartedly helped, this story might just give you a flicker of hope that justice sometimes only arrives late. But it's never truly absent. The Alabaster Arch. Even the name sounded like a promise of something solid, something beautiful and enduring. And for a long time it was. I started there part-time. Just a kid really, still figuring things out. But I loved it. I loved the feel of the handcrafted ceramics, the scent of the beeswax candles, the way the light caught the crystal. It wasn't just about selling things. It was about connecting people with pieces that would become part of their homes, their lives. Over 12 years, I became a senior sales associate. Not a fancy title, I know, but I knew that store, every inch of it. I knew the suppliers, many of them small artisans, just like my mother had been in the early days when she'd supplied her hand-painted silks. I knew the regulars by name, knew their tastes, knew when their anniversaries were. I was the one who stayed late to make sure a special order was perfect, the one who'd quietly fix a wobbly display before anyone noticed, the one who'd train the new hires with patience, showing them not just how to work the register, but how to listen to what a customer truly wanted. It was a calling in its own way. After Mom passed, the Alabaster Arch felt like the closest thing I had to an anchor. I lived alone, a quiet life. The store, the people there, they were my daily landscape, my little world. Then Brenda arrived. My younger cousin, fresh out of college, full of bright, shiny ambition. Her mother, my aunt, had asked if I could, help her get a foot in the door. And I did. Of course I did. Family helps family, right? That's what Mom always said. Brenda was charming, quick to smile, quick to learn. First, I showed her everything. The inventory system, the supplier contacts I'd nurtured for years, even my own little black book of VIP client preferences. I wanted her to succeed. I genuinely did. Arthur Finch, our store manager, seemed impressed. He was an older man, a bit set in his ways, a distant relative of the Sterling family who owned the entire chain, Sterling Holdings. He valued loyalty, or so I thought. He'd always seemed to appreciate my quiet dedication, my knowledge. But Brenda had a way of making her accomplishments sound louder, more significant. Small successes became major triumphs in her telling. I remember the first time it happened. A new line of artisanal glassware had come in. I'd spent weeks researching it, preparing a little presentation for the team, ideas on how to display it, who our target customers might be. The next morning in the team meeting, Brenda stood up and presented my ideas. Almost word for word. With a few extra flourishes, of course. She caught my eye for a split second, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker, then looked away, beaming at Arthur. I didn't say anything. What could I say? It was just an idea. But it felt wrong. Like a small sharp stone in my shoe. Then came the accidental omissions from emails about important client meetings. The little whispers I'd catch just as I walked into the break room. Baseless complaints started to trickle in to Arthur. A customer was supposedly unhappy with my service. A customer I knew I'd bent over backwards for. Another time, a minor till discrepancy that wasn't even on my shift somehow got linked to my name. Each incident was small, deniable, but they added up. The air around me began to feel different, colder. I was still there, still doing my job, but it was like I was becoming transparent. Brenda, on the other hand, was shining. She made a point of laughing at all of Arthur's jokes, remembering his coffee order, offering to stay late for tasks that made her look good. She started having lunch with Sam Holloway. Sam, he and I had been work buddies for years. We'd covered shifts for each other, shared frustrations, celebrated small wins. He knew me, or I thought he did. But I saw him drifting. He'd avoid my gaze sometimes, offer quick, non-committal answers when I tried to talk about the strange things happening. The alabaster arch, my sanctuary, was slowly, subtly becoming a place of unease. Then came the incident with the Caldwell account. Mrs. Caldwell was one of her most important clients, an interior designer with a massive following. She had a huge order pending for a show home, very specific items, very tight deadline. I'd handled all her previous orders. This time, Brenda insisted she could manage it, wanted to prove herself. Arthur, eager to show head office he was nurturing new talent, agreed. A few days later, panic. Half the order was wrong. Wrong colors, wrong sizes. Mrs. Caldwell was furious, threatening to pull all her business, not just from our store, but from Sterling Holdings entirely. It was a disaster. Brenda, of course, was devastated. Publicly, she cried in Arthur's office. She said I must have given her the wrong product codes, that I'd been unhelpful when she'd asked for clarification, perhaps even resentful of her taking on such a big client. She produced a series of emails, carefully worded, that seemed to imply my negligence. Emails I vaguely remembered, but they were twisted, taken out of context. I tried to explain. I had my own notes, my own records. I showed Arthur the original order forms, the confirmations I'd double-checked. But his face was closed. He kept sighing, running his hand through his thinning hair. "Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, or what he wanted me to believe was disappointment. "Sterling Holdings is very concerned. Mrs. Sterling herself is aware of this. This is a serious matter." Sam was called in. I looked at him, hoping for something. A word of support. A confirmation that I was meticulous. That I would never be so careless. He just looked at his shoes. He mumbled something about how everyone was under a lot of pressure. How mistakes can happen. He didn't defend me. He didn't condemn me either. He just faded. It was like trying to argue with fog. My evidence, my years of impeccable service, none of it seemed to matter. The narrative had been set. I was the problem. And I could feel the cold, hard edge of what was coming. The summons to Arthur's office came on a Tuesday morning. The air in the store felt unnaturally still. The usual gentle classical music almost mocking. Arthur wasn't alone. A woman I didn't recognize, with a stern face and a Sterling Holdings lanyard, sat beside him, a folder open on her lap. She didn't introduce herself. Arthur cleared his throat. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Eleanor," he began, his voice flat. "After a thorough review, and in light of recent events, and the significant potential damage to the company's reputation and financial standing," he trailed off, looking at the woman, who nodded curtly. "It has been decided," she picked up, her voice crisp, devoid of any emotion, "that your employment with the Alabaster Arch, and by extension Sterling Holdings, is terminated. Effective immediately." Just like that. 12 years. Reduced to a sentence. There was a standard sterile letter, causing serious damage to the company's reputation and assets. My key card was requested. My final paycheck would be mailed. I didn't argue. What was the point? The decision had already been made, far away, by people who didn't know me, based on lies spun by people I thought I knew. As I walked out of the office, my handbag feeling strangely light without my keys and ID, I saw them, Brenda and Sam, standing near the bespoke gift wrapping station, heads close together. Brenda was smiling, a bright, triumphant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sam looked up, saw me, and quickly looked away, a flush creeping up his neck. That image, that's the one that burned. The quiet, shared victory. I walked out of the Alabaster Arch, the automatic doors sighing shut behind me. The street seemed too loud, too bright. I felt hollowed out, like a beautiful vase suddenly shattered. The pieces were all there, but they would never fit together the same way again. The days that followed were a blur of disbelief and a dull, persistent ache. My small apartment felt too quiet. The routines that had structured my life for over a decade were gone. I applied for other jobs, of course, but the shadow of that dismissal, the vague but damaging reason, it followed me. Then one rainy afternoon, an unexpected phone call. Silas Blackwood. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not really since Mom's funeral. He'd been her financial advisor. a kind, elderly gentleman with wise eyes and a calm demeanor. He asked if we could meet. Just for coffee. He was different from how I remembered. Still kind, but there was a new sharpness in his gaze, a certain resolve. He listened patiently as I, hesitantly at first, told him what had happened. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Eleanor, your mother was a remarkable woman. Shrewd. And she loved you very, very much." He slid a simple, unassuming folder across the table. "She made some very astute investments many years ago. Small, at first. But they grew. She set up a trust for you. A considerable one. She wanted you to be secure. Independent." I stared at him, speechless. A trust? Mom had never said a word. Silas went on. His voice quiet but firm. He too had been watching Sterling Holdings. He knew the Sterling family, knew their history. He'd seen the shift, the focus on short-term profits. The erosion of the very values the company was built on. The values my mother, as one of their first artisan suppliers, had believed in. "This isn't just about what they did to you, Eleanor," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "It's about what they're doing to something your mother helped build." And in that moment, a tiny spark ignited in the hollowness. Not of revenge, not then, but of possibility. A way to reclaim something. Silas didn't push. He just laid out the facts, the options. We talked for hours that day. And slowly a plan began to take shape. A quiet plan. A patient plan. A plan worthy of the unseen weaver I once was. We would not let this injustice stand. The next 2 years, they were a lesson in patience. And in silence. I lived a very unassuming life. Took a quiet job in a small bookstore, far from the polished world of high-end retail. It gave me time to think, to observe, and to learn. Silas, through a series of carefully constructed investment vehicles, began to acquire shares in Sterling Holdings. Small blocks at first, nothing to raise alarm. Just another anonymous investor in the market. But it was our money. My mother's legacy. And I wasn't just relying on the money. I started to use what I knew. My 12 years at the Alabaster Arch hadn't just been about selling pretty things. I knew their systems, their suppliers, their pressure points. I knew which managers were competent and which were just good at corporate politics. I remembered the hushed complaints from other long-term employees, the ones who, like me, felt the company was losing its soul. I started to map it all out. The operational weaknesses, the underperforming divisions, the places where a little pressure, legally and ethically applied, could make a big difference. Silas taught me how to read financial reports, how to understand market dynamics. I was a quick study. Meanwhile, back at the Alabaster Arch, things were changing. Brenda, I heard through the grapevine, was now a regional manager, overseeing several stores. Arthur Finch was still there, clinging to his position. Sam too had moved up a little. But the store itself, it was losing its shine. Customer service ratings were down. Staff turnover was high. The unique, curated feel was being replaced by a more generic, profit-driven approach. They were cutting corners, and it showed. I felt a pang of sadness for what it was becoming, but it also strengthened my resolve. Then one crisp autumn morning, the email arrived in Silas's inbox. Forwarded to me immediately. Sterling Holdings was calling an extraordinary shareholder meeting. The agenda: discussion of future strategic direction and potential changes in corporate ownership structure. It was time. The ghost in the machine was about to make an appearance. The Sterling Holdings boardroom was exactly as I'd imagined it from descriptions in business magazines. Polished mahogany table, panoramic city views, an air of hushed, expensive power. Genevieve Sterling sat at the head of the table, impeccably dressed, her expression coolly professional. Arthur Finch was there, looking a little more frayed around the edges than I remembered. And Brenda was seated near the front, radiating an air of self-importance, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Sam was further back, looking uncomfortable. Silas, representing a consortium of concerned long-term investors, as he put it, was calm, unassuming. He let Genevieve go through the initial pleasantries. The bland corporate speak about market challenges and opportunities. Then, when the agenda item on ownership structure came up, Silas cleared his throat. A small sound, but it cut through the room. "Madam Chairwoman," he began, his voice respectful but firm, "my associates and I have been reviewing the company's performance and direction with considerable interest. And as a result, we have recently consolidated a significant shareholding position." A murmur went through the room. Genevieve Sterling's perfectly arched eyebrow rose a fraction. "Indeed, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her tone a little sharper. "And what percentage might that be?" Silas paused just for a beat. "As of this morning, Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice carrying clearly, "the consortium I represent now holds 52% of Sterling Holdings." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. Genevieve Sterling's composure finally cracked. A faint flush rose on her neck. 52%? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. That's a controlling interest. Who are these associates, Mr. Blackwood?" Silas smiled, a gentle, almost sad smile. "The principal investor, the one who has quietly and patiently brought this group together," he said, turning slightly towards the door, "is someone who knows this company, its strengths and its weaknesses, perhaps better than anyone in this room." And right on cue the door opened and I walked in. I wore a simple dark dress. Nothing flashy. I didn't need to be. The gasp from Brenda was audible. Arthur Finch looked like he'd seen a ghost. His face went a startling shade of pale. Sam just stared, his mouth slightly open. Genevieve Sterling, her eyes narrowed. A flicker of disbelief, then dawning horrified recognition. I walked slowly to the empty chair beside Silas, placed my small, worn leather satchel on the table, and looked directly at Genevieve Sterling. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice calm even. "It's been a while." The shock in that boardroom was a palpable thing. It hung in the air, thick and heavy. Brenda was the first to find her voice, a shaky, incredulous whisper. "Eleanor? What are you doing here? This is some kind of joke, right?" I looked at her, no anger in my eyes, just a quiet assessment. "No, Brenda," I said softly. "This is not a joke." I then turned my attention to Genevieve Sterling. "For the past 2 years, Mrs. Sterling," I began, my voice steady, "while you and your executive team have focused on, let's call them streamlining initiatives, the core values of this company, the very things your grandfather built it on, have been systematically eroded." I opened my satchel and took out a slim folder. Not with dramatic flair, just methodically. "I have here reports," I continued. "Not just financial statements, but customer feedback analyses, employee retention statistics, supplier satisfaction surveys. They paint a very clear picture. A picture of declining quality, diminishing morale, and a customer base that feels increasingly disconnected." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. I detailed specific instances. The loss of key artisan suppliers due to unfair contract terms, the drop in repeat business from long-term clients, the disastrous handling of customer complaints that had once been resolved with grace and personal attention. I spoke of the culture of fear that had crept into the stores, where employees were afraid to speak up, where genuine customer service had been replaced by aggressive upselling targets. Arthur Finch started to bluster. Something about market realities and tough decisions. I let him speak for a moment, then calmly presented evidence of inflated performance metrics from his region, of legitimate employee grievances being systematically ignored. His bluster died in his throat. Brenda tried a different tack. "This is personal, isn't it, Eleanor?" she said, a hint of her old defiance returning. "You're just bitter because of what happened." I met her gaze. "What happened, Brenda?" I said, my voice still even, "was a symptom of a larger problem. A problem of integrity. A problem of leadership that values appearances over substance." I laid out the documented instances of her own unethical practices, the manipulation of sales figures, the deliberate undermining of colleagues. The evidence was irrefutable, gathered quietly, meticulously, over months. Genevieve Sterling, a seasoned executive, knew when she was beaten. The fight had gone out of her. She looked tired, defeated. The other board members, the ones who weren't part of her inner circle, were exchanging uneasy glances. They knew a seismic shift had just occurred. The power in that room had irrevocably changed hands. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind, but a controlled one, with a majority share. And Silas's astute guidance, we initiated the changes that were so desperately needed. Genevieve Sterling tendered her resignation. It was accepted. There was no public shaming, no gloating. Just a quiet, dignified transition. Arthur Finch was dismissed. The reasons were clearly documented: sustained underperformance, mismanagement, and fostering a toxic work environment. He left without a word. Brenda Hayes. Her dismissal was also swift. The evidence of her unethical conduct, her deliberate fabrications, was overwhelming. There was a brief, tearful attempt on her part to appeal to me, to our shared history, to family ties. I listened politely. Then I said very calmly, "Brenda, you were given opportunities. You made choices. And choices have consequences." Sam Holloway wasn't fired. He didn't need to be. A week after the shareholder meeting, his letter of resignation appeared on my new temporary desk. He cited personal reasons. I understood. The shame must have been considerable. I didn't seek him out. There was nothing left to say. My focus, Silas's focus, was on rebuilding. We brought in new leadership, people who understood the delicate balance between commerce and craftsmanship, between profit and principle. We reached out to the suppliers who had been alienated, started to repair those relationships. We listened to the employees, the ones who had stayed, the ones who still believed in what the Alabaster Arch could be. It wasn't about revenge. Honestly, the fire of that initial anger had long since cooled, replaced by a kind of determined clarity. This was about restoring something, honoring a legacy, my mother's quiet belief in quality, in fairness. I met with Silas often during that period. He never sought the limelight, never asked for anything for himself. One evening, as we were going over plans for a new employee training program, I tried to thank him, truly thank him for everything. He just smiled, that kind, wise smile. "Eleanor," he said, "I simply helped you become who you were always meant to be. Your mother would be very, very proud." And in that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The house wasn't just cleared. We were planting anew. A few years have passed since that dramatic shareholder meeting. Sterling Holdings and the Alabaster Arch, they're different now. They're thriving. Not just financially, though the numbers are excellent. But the spirit is back. The stores feel warm again. Alive. Full of beautiful things, yes, but also full of genuine care. I didn't take the CEO position myself. That was never my ambition. I serve as chairwoman of the board. I guide, I advise, I protect the vision. But the day-to-day running is in the hands of a CEO I trust implicitly, someone who shares those core values. I'm still Eleanor Vance. Still quiet, still observant. But there's a stillness in me now. A strength that doesn't need to announce itself. Last year we launched the Alabaster Foundation, in my mother's name. It provides grants and mentorship to new artisans, helps them get their start, ensures that the tradition of craftsmanship continues. Sometimes I walk through one of the Alabaster Arch stores anonymously just to feel it, to see the customers smiling, to hear the staff talking passionately about the pieces. The other day I was admiring a new collection of hand-thrown pottery, the glaze a beautiful deep cerulean, and I just smiled. Quiet, private smile. The betrayal, the hurt, it's part of my story, yes. But it doesn't define me. It became the catalyst for something more. Something better. My revenge, if you can even call it that, wasn't about tearing down. It was about rebuilding. It was about letting a quiet bloom emerge from the ashes. And that, I've learned, is the most powerful kind of victory. My journey at the Alabaster Arch taught me one thing. Betrayal can come from the most unexpected places, but inner strength and a belief in what's right will always be a guiding light. Sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's the time needed to cultivate a stronger comeback, on your own terms. True justice isn't about tearing others down, but about rebuilding your own worth and creating positive change. If you've ever felt underestimated, betrayed by those you trusted, or had to silently endure injustice, please know that you are not alone. Each of us has our own alabaster arch, and a potential Eleanor hidden within. If this story resonated with you, if you found a piece of yourself in my journey, please share your feelings in the comments below. I always read every single one of your messages, because connection itself is precious. And if you want to follow more stories of resilience and rebirth like this one, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. TK Revenge Story still has many journeys to share. You can also support us through the super thanks button if you feel inspired. Because sometimes, giving a little is also a way we find healing for our own souls. Thank you for listening.